Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I'm going to be discussing a subject that involves two different characters from the Dragon Ball franchise, more particularly during the Dragon Ball Z section of it. That would be two different members of the same family, one being the grandfather, the progenitor, Bardock, the other being Gohan, and more specifically, his grandson, future Gohan, and how the two of these characters actually parallel one another in terms of their stories, their outcomes, and everything else along the way. Something that I've come to realize more and more as I've gone back and reread the Frieza saga as well as the Future Trunks arc, and more specifically the Cell saga of Dragon Ball, and watch those particular specials too. But before I get into this subject, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and enabling all notifications. That way you could stay up to date with all my future videos, including ones just like this. Additionally, if you like this, make sure to leave a like, share your own thoughts down below, share the video out, and thank you all for watching, especially within the first hour, and those who watched the entire way through. Together, we're going to be able to go even further beyond with your support. With all that being said, let's get into the video. So let's begin with Bardock, the father of Goku and the grandfather of Gohan. Now, there wasn't really too much to Bardock's story in the original special in which he debuted. Separately from Gohan, most of the other characters in the Dragon Ball franchise and the original manga, Bardock was not actually created by Akira Toriyama. Instead, Akira Toriyama would go on after this to feature him in his own manga during the square-off between Goku and Frieza. During this point in time, we see Frieza recollecting what happened with Bardock, and he mentions how Goku looks very familiar, and then has a flashback to what happened right when he was about to destroy Planet Vegeta, where he says, "That's it. He looks just like the Saiyan who rebelled against me before I destroyed Planet Vegeta." And then the next page, we get to see Frieza when he destroys Planet Vegeta, just like he did in the original Bardock special, in which Frieza, in his weakest form, destroyed Goku's father along with most of the Saiyan race in their homeworld, or at least their adopted one, after, they got rid of all of Baby's people, which we would go on to see a little bit more of in Dragon Ball GT. And what ended up occurring at that point is that Bardock, he failed. Bardock was not the typical protagonist of Dragon Ball in a sense, to where he was someone who, through all of his struggles, through all of his battles, through everything that we had seen, much like the Saiyans on Namek, he was able to overcome his enemy in Frieza and protect his planet from being destroyed. Instead, Bardock was the complete opposite of all of that. He's the failed hero. He is the individual whom was able to do everything he possibly could, and it still didn't make a difference in the end. He is the unsung hero in a sense because he's largely forgotten to time, at least in universe, with the exception of a few characters here and there. Whereas, of course, in the Dragon Ball franchise, they would continue to bring this character back in different ways. For example, when they turned him into a Super Saiyan, an episode of Bardock had him somehow go back in time and survive the explosion of Planet Vegeta, and the blast actually missed him, even though in all the other versions we see it hit him, and a list of other absurd things that he does along the way, which every single one of them kind of diminishes his overall sacrifice, which was his attempt to save his planet from Frieza. And that's one of the things that makes him such an interesting and dynamic character in the original version. Bardock is not some sort of loving parent who does everything in his power to protect his son and to ensure that he's sent off to the Earth, kind of like Superman, but rather is a cold-hearted, civilization-destroying individual who does have a very soft spot in his heart for his family. However, with that being said, it isn't exactly to the level that we would go see Goku have, or other characters such as Gohan, especially, which I'll be getting into soon. Now, Akira Toriyama would eventually try his hand at making Bardock anew in the Dragon Ball Minus special, which was actually at the end of the Jocko Galactic Patrolman manga. During this, Bardock is made a lot more sympathetic, and he also is completely aware of Frieza's plans to destroy the planet based on some kind of hunch he has, especially after he hears that Frieza was asking about the Super Saiyan and the Super Saiyan God, which they would eventually add into the Dragon Ball Super variation, which we could actually see him pondering about in this particular panel right here. Of course, all of this did come out after Battle of Gods, which is why those concepts even existed at the time. We get introduced to Bardock and his wife, or, at least his baby mama, Gine, and the two of them then go to take Goku and bring him to a space pod, put him in, and then decide to send him off to Earth in order for him to survive if Frieza does in fact destroy the planet, making him a lot more similar to Superman in his origin, whereas originally he was similar in the sense that he was sent from a dying planet that eventually would be destroyed along with most of his race, whereas he went to the Earth and ended up becoming a protector. However, it was the inverse before, where he wasn't actually sent by loving parents like he is in this new Toriyama version, but he was actually sent there to destroy, instead had a complete change of heart or complete change of head because he got his head hit by a rock. And this would also go on to be shown one more time in the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie, in which we get to see their destruction, which is a little bit different, and yet it still took a lot of inspiration from this version, the original story. So in all the versions, Bardock tried as hard as he could to fight against a stronger opponent, to fight against a strong enemy that was the main villain of that particular arc during the point in which the special came out, and failed. However, he sent off a protector, a hero, who would inevitably succeed in the goals that he failed at. And this is what leads us directly into the story of future Gohan and how it parallels Bardock. Because in Trunks' story in the manga and in the anime version, we see that Gohan is actually in kind of a similar position in many ways. Instead of him being the father of a character in the sense, he is training essentially a younger brother or even surrogate son in future Trunks, in which Gohan at this point, very similar to Bardock, also bears scars of battle. Bardock has the scars upon his face, he has the scrapes and blood and everything that we see him accumulate over the course of the arc, and we even see he's wearing a bandana drenched in the blood of his former allies. Whereas Gohan, he is damaged, he lost an arm, and not just that, but he's draped in the clothing of his fallen father. Now eventually, much like Bardock, Gohan is made aware of what is going to occur with the main villains of the arc at the time, these being the androids. Now, in the case of Gohan, just like Bardock, they attempt to fight and confront the enemy. This time, Gohan is a Super Saiyan, making him far more powerful than Bardock was, who had a power level somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000. However, I guess if you really want to try and stretch it, you could say that there is a parallel between the two being Super Saiyans as well, and the whole idea of the episode of Bardock where Bardock is the Super Saiyan, but this did come out much later. But just like in the case of Bardock, you could say, especially in the new Toriyama versions, Gohan does essentially save someone, in this case being future Trunks, allowing him to survive and be able to fight, inevitably fight against the androids and defeat them in the future by knocking him out so that Gohan could go and try and sacrifice his life to accomplish a goal, which would be to fight against the android 17 and 18 here, and then in turn try and stop them and giving up his life in the process to do so. It's likely that Gohan's plan here was to rush in to fight against the androids and kill one of them, likely android 17, as we could see right here, saying that it's his time to lose in combat after the last time the two of them fought, which would in turn make it easier for Trunks, who is on his path to surpassing Gohan, to be able to defeat the weaker of the two androids as well. However, just like his grandfather Bardock, Gohan's struggle, his fight, his attempt to stand up to the main villain would be completely in vain. Because as Android 17 reveals, he actually wasn't even using half of his strength the last time he fought Gohan. And as a result, Gohan's death is secured. In the manga version, he's killed off screen, a complete and total failure at his ability to take on the androids, with Trunks inevitably finding his body. However, the difference being that in this case, the Earth survived, survived, whereas in Bardock's case, his whole planet was wiped away. And yet still, there is the child of hope, essentially, who goes on to survive. Whereas in the case of Bardock's son Goku, he becomes the legendary Super Saiyan and then goes on to defeat Frieza on Namek and eliminate him from the equation, at least up until the time in which he returns, at which point the other child of hope, who is also a Super Saiyan, goes on to finish the job by chopping Frieza up and then obliterating him. And of course, in the original version, this was also Goku who did this, which you could see in the top right corner. And just like in the case of Goku being the one to kill Frieza, the one who killed Bardock, so too is future Trunks the one who kills the androids, who in turn killed Gohan. First starting with Android 18, the one who Gohan initially probably wanted Trunks to defeat if he had taken out 17, and then finishing off the stronger of the two, before eventually being the one to wipe out Cell, who was the embodiment of all of the previous characters, including the villains such as Frieza, and then in turn brought peace to the future. Invariably and inevitably, because the fact that these two different characters failed in their mission. That Bardock died when he tried to defend his planet against Frieza, a far more powerful foe. And when Gohan died trying to do the same thing against Android 17 and 18, what it eventually led to was the defeat of those very same villains at the ones who carried on their legacies, as they destroyed the great enemies of their ancestors and the people who trained them, and eventually brought peace to their future as well as the universe in which they had initially called home, fought, and struggled with along the way. Now, another thing worth noting is that in the anime version of the scene, we see a far more extended version of Gohan fighting against not only Android 17, but also Android 18. And despite having only one arm, puts up a much better fight against both these fighters at the same time. This was done in order to make it a far more heroic death than what we had seen that Toriyama did in a very brief scene in the original manga, primarily which is off screen. In the case of Trunks becoming a Super Saiyan, I do think that they handled that even better in the special than the original manga. However, overall, I do think that in many ways, the original version that Toriyama did of Gohan's death is actually better, because whereas I am a fan of Gohan, he's one of my favorites in the franchise, the fact of the matter is that his death was far more bleak and darker in the original version, far more realistic, and cemented just how much of a threat the original androids were, 17, 18, in the future Trunks and original timeline. And although it produced an iconic fight for Dragon Ball Z fans, I do still feel like overall, you can make an argument for the original being superior in that sense. And that is how Bardock, the father of Goku, and future Gohan, the son of Goku, are similar in how their lives and how their events and how their inevitable deaths and failures actually echoed each other and eventually led to a greater whole. But let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. What do you think about this? And are there any other ways you could see these two perhaps paralleling one another? Let me know down below. Additionally, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay tuned for future videos like this. Leave a like. Thank you all for watching this far. You guys are awesome. And with that being said, make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.